Hello, I'm Terri Milligan. I'm a professional chef. I live in Door County, Wisconsin, and today we're going to show you how to make a great salmon dish. I'm going to use a wild king salmon, and we're going to make that salmon into individual salmon Wellingtons. So they're going to be encased in puff pastry. I'm going to put a little mousse inside of it, which is going to have some shrimp, some cream cheese, and some herbs. We're going to use a little bit of basil and sage mixed together and a touch of garlic. That's going to be on top of the salmon. Encase it in the pastry. We're going to bake it. Then we're going to serve it with a raspberry balsamic finishing sauce. And that's going to be some raspberry puree, some very nice quality balsamic vinegar, a little white wine, and a little seasoning to finish it off. We're going to thicken it if needed with a little cornstarch and water just to make it a little thicker so it sits on the plate nicely. So let's begin. So here's our king salmon. This is probably about a 4-pound salmon. It does have skin on it because we got this directly from Alaska. So we want to take that skin off for this recipe. It's also already pin boned, which means these little bones down the center are taken out. So you might want to go through with your hands and just make sure that there aren't any little pin bones left in there so your guests don't get a little surprise. I also like to take this little piece off here, which is called the belly. And you want to take that off just because it's usually got a little bit more fat in it. So we're going to start by taking the skin off. And to do that, I'm going to hold the tail firmly, make about a 45-degree angle cut. I'm going to hold on to the section that has the skin, and then very carefully I'm going to go through, oops, I'm almost done here, and take that skin off. So you're taking your skin off. When you flip your fish, you should have the skin is off, and then you've got this piece of skin that we're going to discard. So when you go to the grocery store, you might be able to get your salmon with the skin off, but I wanted to be able to show you how to do it in case you had a full fillet that came in and you needed to take that skin off. Now we're going to cut this into pieces. So I'm going to cut this into about 5 to 6 ounce pieces. This is a pretty rich dish because you have the puff pastry on it and some shrimp mousse. So you could go with a slightly smaller piece of salmon and still give your guests quite a bit of food. So these are my 5 to 6 ounce pieces. So this is going to be one portion of salmon, and you can see that this is a pretty thick salmon, probably about 2 inches in height, and that's a great piece of salmon to get. You want to get some salmon that has some height to it so you have a nice piece of salmon for your guests. Now we're going to make a mousse that goes inside of the salmon Wellington. So what I have here is some cream cheese, this is some cooked shrimp, a little bit of garlic, some fresh herbs. We're going to use some basil and a little sage and some salt and white pepper. So let's make the mousse. So here comes our cream cheese into our food processor, some garlic clove, some poached shrimp, and with the shrimp, because shrimp are expensive, you can get smaller shrimp. You don't have to pay for the bigger sized shrimp. Just get some small shrimp to put in here. And then some fresh herbs, a little salt and a little pepper. So now we're going to pulse this to create our mousse. And I think we've got it. And it's going to be a nice creamy cream cheese mousse with a little bit of shrimp and the fresh herbs. If you don't care for the shrimp in it, you don't have to put that in there. You could put fresh asparagus in there that's been blanched, and you could have an asparagus mousse, and that would be another nice complement for this dish without the shellfish. So next, we're going to encase the salmon in the puff pastry, and we're going to put on top of it a little bit of this shrimp mousse that we made, shrimp herb mousse that we made, and we're going to put that on top of the salmon. Encase it in this puff pastry. Use a little bit of an egg wash. This is an egg beaten with just about 2 to 3 tablespoons of cream, and we're going to use that to glaze the top. If you are decorative, you can make a few little decorations too with the puff pastry scraps, and I'm going to show you how to do that to make the top of the Wellingtons look even more beautiful. So we're going to start with the puff pastry. I'm using a puff pastry that you can buy at a grocery store. It comes in the frozen food section. You're going to get 2 sheets. Usually you can get 4 to 6 of these Wellingtons out of one of those puff pastries. But I did do a little bit of rolling on the pastry so that I could smooth it out, because when you get it out of the package, it's a little thick and you want to make sure it's usually folded in half. You unfold it and do a little rolling action on it to get rid of the crease. So you might need a little bit of flour on your board and on your pastry so it doesn't stick. There's a lot of butter in puff pastry. So I'm going to put some of this mousse on top of my salmon. Then I'm going to put the salmon mousse side down so that the mousse is on top when we flip it over. Now I'm going to take a little bit of my egg wash. This actually is going to serve as the glue. And we've got a little glue. We're going to put the sides over. And then these sides are going to go up to meet in the center. And we're basically making a little package. And don't worry if there's a little flour on there, because our egg wash is going to get that out of there. We're going to decorate our Salmon Wellingtons with a few pieces of puff pastry that we have left from rolling out our dough. So what I'm going to do is just use a paring knife, and I'm going to freeform some decorations. I'm going to cut out some little leaf patterns. Now these are just free-formed leaves. And I'm putting a little bit of a indentation in the middle so it looks like these leaves have a vein. You could use a cookie cutter if you're not good at free-forming designs. And I'm going to take my Salmon Wellington, brush it on the top all over with that egg wash. And with the egg wash, you always want to use a cream with the egg, because that's going to give you the most color. You want a nice dark color. If you do something with just milk, there's not as much fat in it, and you don't get the deep color. So you want a nice color. So I'm putting all 3 of these little leaf decorations on top of my Salmon Wellington. I'm going to again take a little egg wash and go all over it. Then we're going to put it on a baking sheet, which I've lined with parchment paper. And we're going to let this actually sit in the refrigerator for about 15 minutes. That's just so that the pastry can set up and get a little cooler, so when it bakes, it doesn't shrink, because puff pastry has a lot of butter in it. You want it to be chilled when you put it in. So we're going to put it in the refrigerator for about 15 minutes just to chill up. So we're going to make our raspberry balsamic sauce, and we're starting with a raspberry puree, and all I did was get 3 cups of frozen raspberries. I thawed them, and I put them in a food processor with about a 1/3 cup to a 1/2 cup of sugar. Then I strained them through a strainer so that we got a nice puree, and you can make that ahead of time. In addition to our raspberry puree, we're going to use a nice quality balsamic vinegar. I have 2 different ones here. One is about double the price of the other one, and since you're cooking with this, you could actually use the one that's a little more inexpensive. But here, when I cook in our restaurant, I use a cherry balsamic vinegar. This retails for about $50, so you might not want to cook for this. This is great just straight up on berries. Instead, what we're going to use is a nice quality balsamic vinegar that you can get in the $10 to $15 range. So our Salmon Wellingtons are now completely cooked. So here's a Salmon Wellington that I took out of the oven. You want to let it rest for about 5 to 10 minutes before slicing it, just so it'll stay warm inside. It'll be plenty hot, but you want it to just rest for about 5 minutes so you can make sure that it has a nice even slice and slices nicely, doesn't fall apart because the puff pastry is a little too hot. Now I've got a mixture of vegetables. I just put together some carrots, some zucchini, and some kale, and I'm doing a little saute and just a little bit of olive oil, and I'm going to use that for my plate so that my Salmon Wellington can rest on top of something. So here's our Salmon Wellington. I've got one of them here. I'm just going to present one of them for you today, ready to plate. Now if you want to, you could just have this presented on a plate with a little bit of vegetable and the sauce around it. But we're going to do a little more of a restaurant version of plating it. So we're going to do a slight diagonal on this, slice through it, and we have our salmon with the mousse on top, and then this is a nice way for you to see and make sure that it's done as well. So now we're ready to plate our Salmon Wellington. So I have a little bit of vegetable here. I'm going to just put it so we have some height for the Salmon Wellington. I'm going to take a little bit of our sauce, which I have on my back burner here. I'm actually going to put the sauce down first so that the Wellington can sit on top of the sauce. And if you'd like your guests to have a little bit more sauce, you can always have a little bit in a ramekin that you serve next to the fish. And then we're going to plate our fish on a slight diagonal. Okay. So we have our Salmon Wellington with a little balsamic raspberry sauce with a mousse made out of shrimp and some fresh herbs, in this case basil and sage. And you can make the Salmon Wellingtons probably about an hour ahead of time. Because it's fish, you don't want it to sit too long, but you could make it an hour ahead of time and have them in your refrigerator ready to go in the oven. And that sauce could be made up to 2 days ahead of time and just reheated. So I hope you can use this at home, and thanks for joining me today.